Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. This video is going to be a contribution to my, what's the name of the series again? My experimental logic series. I do this every now and then. The experimental logic is you guys who've watched it, it's really sort of out there, abstract logic discussion. Specifically for me, most of it is situated within sort of epistemic conceptions, right? Epistemic modal, Rumsfeld I did first, and then I did my idea of stratified existential quantification, this is actually sort of a baton pass from stratified existential quantification to this video, which I'm going to title, what did I just say I was going to title it? Existential Specificity. Granted, this doesn't exist, right? This stuff doesn't exist. It's me just throwing stuff out there, because better logicians might run with the idea and formalize it more. Computer geeks might pick it up and do something with it. Sort of like when I did in my critical thinking series on non-monotonic logic. Somewhere in there, I did a whole bit on a game that I designed on heuristic algorithms. And it's something I designed, sort of mathematical, logical design, which people can use to do all types of crap, right? So this is in the vein of that, right? It's just me throwing stuff out there for no other purpose than for people who do truly have an understanding. They can amend it. It's just for you to think, right? Don't worry so much about the syntax and the structure as much as the concepts. To me, that's what's most important, right? So conceptually, we have an understanding. This video, I would recommend, if you haven't watched the stratified existential quantification video, that you watch that, just so you have an idea of where I'm going to take it. Shout out to Greg Lewis, big shout out to you, Greg. This whole video is basically dedicated to you because you're the gadfly that got me thinking about it, and I'm actually borrowing your example. So to be honest with you, I haven't really, in a sense I have contributed, and I am going to contribute because I'm going to flesh this out, but the idea is 100% rooted in your example of, do you have $1 in your pocket, right? For those of you who know about Gettier's JTB, Justified True Belief, it's not necessarily in line with Gettier's JTB, but it's sort of like that. It's in the same tradition. I'm gonna do it a more sort of conceptually dense mathematical, logical analysis of that. So that's about the extent of it. This is my first video that I'm putting up, really putting up sort of post-Igar hack, which I won't bring up again in the virtual world. It doesn't include, obviously, the video that talked about the hack, because I was upset, so I had to talk about the hack. And it doesn't obviously include the video giving the third iPad away to Ian Jacobson. So shout out again to Ian for being a freaking rock star. Your submission was awesome. I hope you enjoy your iPad. Because I had to do that video because I had to give away the iPad. I already purchased it, so I had to do the video announcing the winner. And then I was like, I don't know if I'm going to put up any more videos. But I was on Facebook, and, I got a pretty cool community of nerds, and we were sitting around talking about nerd shit. And then Greg Lewis, he hit me with, does he have $1 in his pocket? And I was like, that's a great question. Let's think about that. And this video is sort of, I tried to suppress my desire to do this video, because I was like, I don't want to do the video, knowing that I did want to do the video. And I decided, fuck it, I'm going to do the video. So, Greg, shout out to you, dude, for being a gangster. So, again, don't worry about the structure as much. This is abstract, it's conceptual. Worry about the ideas. You will need to know what a unique existential, you will need to know the unique existential quantifier. And again, if you want a more detailed discussion of that and the function of it, then watch my stratified, and I'll try to link it if I remember. And enough talking, let's get into the video. So, I'm going to call this existential specificity, right? S-P-E-C-I-F-I-C-I-T-Y. I think I spelled that right. Existential specificity. Again, this doesn't exist, right? I'm basically just freestyling it. Just to throw ideas out there, because you never know, right? Somebody watches this video, and that's the whole point, right? Greg Lewis was the gadfly to get me to do this video, and I might be the gadfly, formalize it a little bit more, and some computer programmer or some logician watches the video and be like, hey, you know, I could really do something with that, you know. His description was a little crass, but let me refine it and make something out of it. It would be cool. So why not do it? So here I am. Alright, so the idea is, before we begin, Greg, you will need to have a pretty solid background, and I can't do the preface, right? So I'm going to assume, if you're watching this video, that you're going to have a pretty solid background. I'll try and explain as much as I possibly can, but I can't go into rudimentary detail about explaining some of these concepts, right? So you need to know what the existential quantifier is, right? It's this, and you will need to know the unique existential quantifier, which is this, right? And that's where I'm situating the discussion in terms of that. You will also need to know, because I'm going to hybridize this just for the fun of it, why not? Conceptually, remember this is a conceptual video. You will need to know, and I did a modal logic series, you will need to understand the symbolization in modal. The pyramid or the triangle is possibility, and the square is necessity. And you will need to understand the function of S5, right? And basically S5, it says, you know, anytime you have redundancies in operators, or if you have distinct operators, then you look at the position of the last operator, and the position of the last operator will let you know what it is. So if I have necessary possible, then it's possible. If I have possibly necessary, then it's necessary. So you look at the function of the last operator, and you can consolidate sort of the functionality, actually, to either necessity or possibility. I've done a very systematic account of this already. I literally sort of deconstructed it, how we get to S5 as a combination of n plus 5. Rather advanced, but if you want to, and I'll try and link. I'm going to have links so that this video makes sense, because this video is a combination of my modal logic number 5 video, which accounts for S5 and possibility and necessity. It's a combination of that plus my stratified existential quantification video, which I'll link as well. Watch both of those videos, then come back and watch this, and you'll have an understanding of where I'm going to take it. Again, this is totally conceptual. It's for fun. You know, I could be doing stupidity on YouTube, which is fun, but I'd rather just do this. So take the lecture with a grain of salt. And I always give a caveat that I am a professor, but I am not a professor of logic. So I do this as a hobby. If you identify that I've made errors, feel free to tell me how wrong I am. It'll be interesting to see the response that I get back from the community, if I get any response at all. So Greg Lewis goes, and I thought it was super cool. I thought it was extremely cool. I actually had a great time. He never responded again, the bastard, in the video, but he got the video started by formalizing this, right? He says, Jason, imagine whether or not, let me sort of paraphrase what he said, because he didn't actually say it like this, but the implication of what he said was, imagine I go to a friend, let's say it's Greg, and I say, hey Greg, I want to know, do you have $1? And Greg says, yeah, I do have $1. Now Greg really knows the state of affairs that determines whether or not he has $1. He knows whether he has $1 in his pocket or not. He knows whether he has $1 and a 5, or $1 and a 20, or several dollars, several single dollar bills, and a 5 and a 20, and so forth. But I don't know. So he knows this. I'm going to situate the discourse and the concept in terms of epistemic as well, because it is a knowledge distinction. And that's really the basis of where I'm going to take this, right? Greg's knowledge is a matter of fact. He knows. And he knows it with certainty. I don't know. And assuming that I realize that I can't know, I won't know the truth of the existence of the $1 in his pocket until he shows me. Right? I could complicate this even further by incorporating testimony, but I won't. I've already done sort of the logical formulation of testimonies in my very last video in my critical thinking. It's very, very complex. And to add that level of complexity to this would just take this to a whole nother level that I'm not, and it would probably take me an hour plus to formalize everything. I don't have that type of time to do it. So let's just think conceptually, right? We're going to talk about Greg's pocket. actually, I guess I am going to make this sort of fundamental. I'm going to start really slow because I do want to make sure the other Greg B, who's younger, I think he's 18 or 19, he wanted to understand where this is going, so I am going to make it, I'm going to go slow so that people can have an understanding of where this goes. So we're talking about Greg's pocket and the money that he has in his pocket. It could be the case that Greg actually has no money in his pocket. There's no money at all in his pocket, right? He's just lying. So the state of affairs here, this empty circle, represents Greg not having any money in his pocket at all. And we'll formalize all of this in a bit. I just want to sort of explain this because it's going to get a little rigorous later. Then we can have, as a separate state of affairs, that Greg has $1 in his pocket. Right? So that Greg has exactly $1 in his pocket as a solid dollar bill, and that's it. He has no other bills. He only has $1, and that $1 is a dollar bill. Right? So that Greg has $1 in his pocket. We have another state of affairs where Greg could have several $1 bills in his pocket. Right? We have another state of affairs where Greg could have several $1 bills in his pocket. We'll put another one just for the fun of it. And that basically covers the gamut. Introducing $5 bills and $10 bills and $20 bills doesn't really help the analysis. But we have a state of affairs where he has no money in his pocket at all, which obviously means he has no $1 bills. A state of affairs where he has exactly $1 bill in his pocket, and it's represented by a $1 bill. And a state of affairs where he has several $1 bills in his pocket. So Greg begins this Facebook interaction, and this is why I love Facebook, right? Aside from awesome memes that you would never come across and just cool songs and stuff, which is why I'll never probably get off of Facebook, is because I would never find a lot of this crap in the world. It was cool to throw something out and to get such a technical response back from the community. And Greg situates his response in terms of this. Right? He goes, well, let me think about the state of affairs where I talk about it's possible that I have several dollar bills in my pocket. And he formalizes it as such. And he's right in formalizing it this way, which is this. He formalizes it like this. And basically all that this says is there is an X, right? There is an X such that that X is a dollar. Right? So there is an X such that that X is in a dollar. Okay, so we recognize then that in terms of Greg's discussion, he says to me, and this is what started the whole thing, is, well, let's talk about the state of affairs where I say there is an X such that the X that I have in my pocket is a dollar. Well, you have to recognize that this existential quantification, where's my red? This here is really a general. This refers to what I would classify as a general X. Remember, I'm freestyling this, right? This is really to sort of get to the conceptual root of these ideas, more than really getting it heavy into the logic, which I've done 10 or 20 hours of in other videos. This is really to understand conceptually where this is going. But this existential quantification represents a general X. Right? There is his formulation, there is an X such that the X is a dollar, means that there is a state of affairs, provided he's telling the truth, such that, you know, if we represent X, that X could represent this dollar, it could represent this dollar, or it could represent this dollar. Right? There is a state of affairs in my pocket such that that represents a dollar. Okay. There is also, however, and remember, Greg knows the truth of this. I don't know the truth because I don't have access to his pocket. There is also a state, however, where we can say that he has only $1. He has only one bill in his pocket, and that bill is a dollar. And that would be different from this, right? And that would be represented, there's many ways of representing it, but that would be represented by this. This unique existential quantification, right? This unique existential quantification specifies, S-P-E-C-I-F-I-E-S, specifies a particular, and I've already done a video on this, P-A-R-T-I-C-U-L-A, a particular X, right? There is a unique, this says there is an X, such that that X is in a dollar. This says that there is a unique X, that X is a dollar. Sort of the redundancy in that X, right? This says there is an X such that that X is a dollar. This says there is a unique X, right? There is a unique X such that that X is a dollar. There's a very, and this is in terms of English, in terms of grammar, this is called abstention, right? To ostensibly define something is to point to it and say that thing there. That's what this is, right? There is a unique X, there is a specific X such that that X is a dollar. Now, granted, you could say that within, well, and this is where I'm going to complicate it, right? So before and this I'm not going to symbolize right now because it would just be too complicated, right? So, the identification of one specific thing, the identification of a general thing that facilitates being a dollar, right? You'd have to facilitate the function of being a dollar. So we have two different state of affairs. Okay, so that's the first level. The first level is really not that, I mean, it's a little advanced, but, you know, you should understand that. If you watch the other videos, and if you're watching this, I hope you do understand it. It should be sort of obvious at this point. So that's the first level. The second level is a bit deeper, because the second level looks at the potential combinations of possibility in Greg's pocket. Greg gets a whole video because he gave me the greatest prompt ever, right? So, and this is where it gets, just for fun, you can try to conceptualize all of the different combinations that could logically happen as a state of affairs in his pocket, right? What could potentially be possible, and what could potentially be impossible, right? Because I don't know if he actually has anything in his pocket, so I have to have at least two conditions. If he's telling the truth, what conditions might arise, and if he's lying, and he really has no money, what conditions might arise. So that there's two possibilities, and this should be super simple. Either he has money in his pocket, of any kind, or he doesn't have any money in his pocket. I have to be able to try and formalize that sort of rigorously. So how do we do that? Alright, so for me, what I wanted to do is to identify the non-existence of anything in his pocket. Now it gets deeper. The second level, so the first level is to identify the existence of money in its variations in his pocket. And the next level, a level deeper, is to identify the non-existence of money in his pocket. Now, this is what I love about logic, because you would never be able to identify this very, very, very nuanced distinction in the absence of existence. But there is, logically, a distinction in the absence of existence, non-existence. Now we can, let me get a little swig of caffeine because I can feel the force. You would think that if I talk about the non-existence of something not existing, that it's just prima facie the thing doesn't exist. I want to categorically deny that on logical grounds, that there are types of non-existence. So that's really, obviously, that's why I gave a shout out to Lewis, because I followed a link and I went to a discussion on Frege's discourse on non-existence, and then I thought to myself, holy crap, we can talk about types, typologies, taxonomy of non-existence. Why? We recognize that the absence of a unique dollar is, in a sense, at least conceptually, now this is really abstract, right? But the absence of a unique dollar is different from the absence of a dollar in general. It's such a nuanced point. It's such a nuanced point, but now we can recognize that there is, when we're talking about specificity, right? We're talking about getting very, very specific, very, very precise. To say that I don't have a dollar in my pocket, here is my pocket, I have no money, I don't know if you can see it because it's low, but I'm pulling out my pocket, there's nothing in there. I don't have a dollar in my pocket. the absence of money in my pocket could be defined as the absence of specific money in my pocket or the absence of money in general in my pocket. Both have the same ultimate end state, which is the absence of money. But the conditions which facilitate that end state as the consequence, right, the antecedent, which facilitates that condition of the absence of money as the consequent, is different. How do you formalize then, if we make this initial assumption, the absence of money as specified, non-existence as specified? Remember, this is a freestyle, I'm just sort of making this up as I go. Well, we would have the negation of the unique existential claim with respect to the existence of a particular dollar. So that we could talk about this then, we could talk about this in two senses. The first sense is the non-existence of any specific, unique existential existence, right? Obviously, we're talking about existence as such. If we are ostensibly defining something as such, that thing right there, then to remove that thing right there would satisfy the condition of non-existence, right? It has to. That has to follow. So what do? We negate this, right? We negate it would be this, actually, it would be a bracket. We negate it. So, there is a unique x such that that x is a dollar. And we're denying it, right? We're saying there is not a unique x, there is not a unique x such that that x is a dollar. It doesn't exist. There is no dollar. There is no specific dollar, right? Which would account for the absence of anything in my pocket, okay? The next would be the negation of any dollar in general, right? There could be a state of affairs where I have several $1 bills in my pocket, and I'm denying the general claim that any number of $1 bills exist in my pocket. There are no collection of $1 bills in my pocket, is sort of colloquially how I'm saying it, which would still result in the same effect, right? So that would be represented by the negation of what Greg initially gave me. There is an x such that that x is a dollar, and I'm saying there is not, right? There is not an x. There is not an x, a general x, such that that x is a dollar. It doesn't exist. Both these state of affairs specify the state of affairs where I'm talking about non-existence, the non-existent thing. But you need to recognize that logically these two things are different. This results in the same end state. This results in the same end state. However, the antecedent is different. The consequence is the same. And what we do as human beings in terms of, and I think epistemologically this would be a really cool paper someone else can write or do something, just throw it out there. But I think it really is the case that when we talk about verificationism, positivism, what have you, empirical observation, we look at empirical observation and we see a thing in the world and we build our logic, we build our science, we build basically everything on that. I think it's unfortunate that we haven't rigorously, intellectually, analyzed the non-existence of the variations in non-existence. The absence of the thing, it might be scientifically speaking, logically speaking, mathematically speaking, a good thing for us to think about how a thing came not to exist. Why is it the case that this thing is not in existence? I guess is a better way of saying it, right? So that the absence of any money in his pocket varies in terms of means. In the first state, it is the denial of any specific money in his pocket, which results in the consequence, the absence of money. In the second state of affair, it denies the general existence of any general dollar bills in his pocket. But these two things are not the same. They're not the same. The consequence is the same, but the antecedent isn't. Thus, it would have to be the case that we could talk about both of these as being necessary but not sufficient. Or, and this is where it becomes complicated, sufficient with respect to what? Granted, obviously this is a sufficient and necessary condition with respect to just the absence of any money. But if you talk about this absence now in a more holistic, a more specified sense, and you talk about, and this is where it gets really hard, and I don't even know that I'll be able to communicate it. I hope this makes some type of sense. But if we talk about the condition of absence, the condition of non-existence as such, then the condition of absence, the condition of non-existence as such, has to account for all of the possible conditions for non-existence. Thus, if we are talking about the condition of non-existence as such, it would be, either of these would be necessary but not sufficient, because there's more that are needed. And the question is, could we conceptually formalize the complete set of conditions for non-existence? That's way, way out there. I don't even know that that made sense. I hope it did. But the idea is, of course, this is both necessary and sufficient given sort of traditional logic, right? Given sort of traditional understanding, there is an absence. That absence is defined by the non-existence of this particular dollar. I wish I had a dollar. It would be a great problem, right? This particular dollar is not there. Okay, it's both necessary and sufficient. However, if we are talking about very abstractly, the attempt to formalize logically, mathematically, the conditions for non-existence as such, with respect to this dollar example that Greg gave me, then no one condition can be sufficient because there are multiple. So they're necessary but not sufficient. So what's interesting at this level, which is obviously a much deeper level, is that we would have to say sufficiency and the necessity contingent on what interpretation of non-existence. Yes, this is sufficient if by non-existence you mean the non-existence of this particular thing and you're not thinking about anything else. But if you're talking about non-existence as such, with respect to a dollar being in my pocket, in terms of Greg, then you're wrong, right? Because there's another condition that would, in here, that would satisfy the condition, and thus it can't be sufficient. It has to be necessary, right? So that's another level, right? That's a much, much deeper level. Quite a bit more complicated, but hopefully, I hope that makes sense. I don't know how to make it any more sort of meaningful than that. Now, let's think about the idea of, and I'm going to formalize this a little differently than I did on Facebook, just because I want it to be a little bit more rigorous. But think about the impossible existence, right? So, think about the impossibilities with respect to this analysis, right? How would we think about the impossibilities with respect to this analysis, right? Well, in order to think about this, we would have to isolate the four things that we have. We have one thing here, right? There exists a unique x such that that x is a dollar. That's one thing. We have another thing here. There exists an x such that that x is a dollar. Okay. We have another thing here, which is the denial of that claim, and then the denial of the specific and the denial of the general. So we have at least four things that we can compare. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to put both of these vertically on one line and both of these vertically on the other line, and we'll continue the analysis like that. Just so that it makes for a good visual, right? So that we would have the specific existence of the dollar, and then we would have the general existence of the dollar. Okay, and then on this line we would have the negation of this, right? The negation of this. So that's, well, I won't separate it, but on the other line we'd have the negation of this. I'll make it bigger. And then the negation of this. Oops. Okay, so in order, my idea is, okay, we recognize what we're trying to do. First of all, what are we trying to do? we are trying to identify the complete logical combination of the very specific existence or non-existence of money or the lack thereof in Greg's pocket. Right? The idea is, the first recognition, that sort of the second level down, is a recognition that the absence of money in his pocket can now be specified. Instead of equivocating, which I would argue on a very, very, very deep epistemological level, and I hope this video catches on. I would love to get some feedback from some uber nerds on this, because I think it's, the more I do this now, the more I realize that this has to be the case, right? It has to be the case. There might be different ways of sort of assessing it or formalizing it, but conceptually it has to be on point. Why? Because the denial of any individual specific dollar would satisfy the condition for non-existence, but also the denial of any general dollar would satisfy the condition for non-existence. And then when we talk about non-existence, you're equivocating in your use linguistically, in your use of the term non-existence, if you don't specify what you mean by non-existence, right? And if I make just that contribution alone, I think that would be freaking awesome. But I want to go even deeper than that. Now, it's the attempt to formalize and think of, well, what would be impossible existences in his pocket? Not the absence, or, because obviously absence is possible, right? The absence of money is, there's no contradiction in that. It's just that it doesn't exist in his pocket. So there's no contradiction in absence. There's no contradiction in specificity. There's no contradiction in generality. So what is the, so these three states of affairs, these four states of affairs, by themselves do not represent contradiction. There's no contradiction in these four states of affairs by themselves. Contradiction arises then once you attempt to conjoin via conjunction, which I'm going to represent as a dot. Instead of the ampersand, I'm going to use the dot because I don't know how to draw ampersand. So the dot represents conjunction. So in terms of conjunction then, the impossibility, contradiction arises once we attempt to unify, to conjoin various elements that individually, in and of themselves, represent no contradiction. No contradiction in unique existence, no contradiction in general existence, no contradiction independently of the denial of unique or the denial of general existence. Okay, now let's try and localize contradiction. So, I've done a video formalizing this in a very, very, very specific, in my critical thinking series with respect to contraries, contradictions, and so on, right? Subalternation and so on. It's a very rigorous video. It took me a lot of time to prepare it, and I might link that video as well. I have to link quite a few videos so that you have a full understanding. But basically the idea is that when you structure contraries, subcontraries, alternations, and so on and so forth, subalternation, there's a way of assessing relationships. I'm using that template from my critical thinking video where I formalize it explicitly in a very sort of rigorously mathematically rich way. I'm using the same vehicle to analyze Greg's analysis of the dollar or absence thereof in his pocket. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the relationships, the sort of obvious relationships in terms of contradiction. Let's start with the easiest. The easiest recognition is that the easiest recognition, and I'm going to be super simple, is the realization that you cannot have this state of affairs. You can't say that A exists and at the same point in time not A exists. This becomes a contradiction. So this is going to formalize. There's many different ways of writing this, just like there's many different ways of writing this, right? And you can make this more complicated in terms of universal quantification. But the simplest way to write this is A and not A, which means you can't both be 6 feet tall and not 6 feet tall. One in the same time in one in the same space, right? You are either 6 feet tall or you're not 6 feet tall. This becomes a contradiction. Again, many ways of writing this, formalizing it, but just like there's many ways of doing that, but I want to keep it simple. So we recognize that the easiest way to identify contradiction, logical impossibility of the state of affairs of Greg's pocket with respect to his dollar is to look for instances where we use A and not A as our template for contradictory existence, something that's impossible. And we recognize immediately that across from each other we have a very unique existence of a very specific dollar And then just the opposite, the denial. So to conjoin both of these would lead to a contradiction. So obviously the first impossibility then would be the state of affairs where I attempt to conjoin this, the specific existence of x such that that x is $1, right? The specific, the uniquely specified existence of x such that that x is $1, and conjoining that with the denial of exactly that same thing, right? Conjoining that with, make that bigger, conjoining that with the denial of exactly the same thing, right? The denial of a uniquely specified x such that that x is $1, right? Forgive me if I get my brackets wrong. I mean, it's hard. There's a lot of stuff here. I don't have time to sort of check brackets. You guys can correct me where I screwed up a bit. I don't have a problem with that. The first thing is, we know that this is an impossible existence. Why is it an impossible existence? Because it has the form A and not A. A and not A. The unique existence of x, we're talking about this state of affairs, right? We're saying that there exists a state of affairs where he has $1, right? There exists a unique x such that that x is $1. That's this. And then we're denying it here. We recognize this, right? It conforms to this, right? So we're saying, if you want to look at it visually, this is represented by visually, this is represented by this, and I'll just put it up and then I'll erase it because I need space. This is represented by this, and the attempt to conjoin it with this. That's what that looks like. And obviously that's a contradiction. You can't both have $1 in your pocket and not have $1 in your pocket. Right? That's a contradiction. That's a visual representation of this. And we recognize visually this is impossible, so we recognize that this logic has to follow that this is impossible, right? The affirmation of the unique existence of the dollar in Greg's pocket and simultaneously the denial of the unique existence of specified dollar in his pocket is conjoined logically impossible. You cannot have that existence. Okay, right? So now we recognize in terms of existential discussion that we are existentially more specified. Right? We can talk not just about specifying so that we don't equivocate in non-existence, but we can also specify now even more rigorously when we say contradiction, specifically what type of contradiction. My argument is that this type of contradiction, though many will in here, I think I might be able to formalize 4 of them, this type of contradiction is different from another. Why am I doing this? Why does this make any sense? 1, it's just fun. 2, it's nerdy fun. But 2, I think I use this in terms of, I think someone asked me, do you program or do you want to use computer? I don't use computer code, I don't do all that stuff. I use this in terms of my analysis of what people say and what people write. And what I say and what I write. So when you say that something doesn't exist, you need to be really specific about what you mean. And I think it would be cool to even, you know, I'm just getting the ball started. So it would be cool to see if this builds any further so that we can really start to look at non-existence sort of logically, mathematically, in a much more rigorous sense. Similarly, as I've done in my sort of contrary-subcontrary video in my non-monotonic logic and critical thinking series, when we talk about contradictions, we can make specifications with respect to quantification, with respect to the impossible existence of. So that's the first state of affairs, and I showed you what that looks like. So that would be the combination of this and this, right? But then we recognize that we can, let's think about what other existences might happen. Well, it seems like this would be a contradiction as well. I'm saying that there is the case that a unique existence exists, there is something that exists uniquely, right? With respect to Greg's pocket, you have to put it in this very specific place and time. With respect to now, analyzing now, the state of affairs in Greg's pocket, that there is a very specific thing there, a $1 bill. That $1 bill is in his pocket. To then say that there is no general dollar in his pocket, right, is exactly the same state of affairs that I drew before, right? It's different because it's more nuanced now, but that's a contradiction. If you think about it, is it possible that you can make an affirmation of a specific existence while also denying any general existence. No, that makes no sense. You can't make an affirmation of a unique existential existence, right? Unique existential existence while also generalizing any general distinction existence, because to be specific means that there is at least the potential that it's general, right? It's some. It's all. It's something, but to deny it is to deny that possibility undermines the existence as well. And I'm going to add possibility and necessity to this to complicate it even more in a second. All right, so this is also impossible, right? You can't say that we have a state of affairs, if I could draw this bracket right. You can't say that you have a state of affairs where we affirm a unique existence of X, such that X is that specific dollar in his pocket, and deny, because here we go here, and also deny any general existence, right? Because as we said, the and this is why I love this, right? Because it fine-tunes us, and I think we can. I could take this again if I could take it even deeper if I added testimony to this, but I'm not. I'll let other people who are interested to play with this a little bit more. But the idea, the specificity of non-existence leads us to an increasingly more specified understanding of contradiction. I'll say that again. The realization that we can specify non-existence, which sort of came to me, in my YouTube interaction in a private message with Lewis, I was like, holy crap. And I just went to the link and I just typed in Frege because I know Frege talked about it. I found it and I was like, yeah, I can run with this. And then Greg sort of prompted me with this dollar bill thing, and now it's morphed into this monstrosity. But the idea is, once we recognize that we can specify non-existence in other terms than just to say zero or the absence, something like that, right? We can say that this condition has an antecedent, and the antecedent produces the same consequence, but both antecedents are different, right? Granted, the consequence is the consequence. It's a fixed state of affairs. There's nothing there. But how there came to be nothing there, which makes sense, we can specify. That recognition allows us now, because we're using this to create this, right? And all of this is under impossibility, so that when we talk about impossibility, we can be more specific, right? So that the affirmation of a particular existence, right? There is a specific X such that that X is a dollar, cannot be conjoined with the denial of any X in general. Because to be an X in general means that you are an X specifically, right? You have to have met, it would both be necessary and sufficient. It would facilitate both of those conditions, right? So that this becomes a contradiction. Okay, so we have the first contradiction, which is the relationship of sort of the obvious. We have the second set of contradiction, because if we are denying a general existence of any dollar, then we can't have the specific existence of a dollar. It's the easiest way to say it, right? If we deny the general existence of any dollar, we can't simultaneously make the affirmation of, for existence of, a specific dollar. It's sort of obvious. Now, with respect to, if we make the assumption in terms of generality, this leads us to the third state of affairs, right? Which is obvious, which is the denial of, just like this, it's exactly the same format, A, not A, right? A, not A. It's exactly like this, has exactly the same format, recognizing then that one impossible existence is the state of affairs where Greg, has a dollar in general, right? It could be this dollar, it could be this dollar, it could be this dollar, it could be any of these dollars, right? The denial of any, or the affirmation of there is an X such that X is a dollar, and this could be X, this could be X, this could be X. Any of them would satisfy the condition for this, and the denial of that, right? So obviously that's another impossible existence. So now what we're doing is we're specifying the levels of impossibility with respect to the state of affairs in Greg's pocket. None of these, though all of them result in, again, all of these then result in impossibility, there is a specificity that we've attributed to this impossibility. Let's be very, very rigorously dense in attempting to analyze. And again, the only reason I love using stuff like this, and I will end up using stuff like this in analyzing people's language and people's logic in terms of their linguistic sort of either rhetoric or their written language, and hopefully make myself a better writer, a better speaker, so that I'm very specific in what I'm saying. But so we would have the general existence of x, such that x is $1. There is an x such that x is $1. This is what prompted the whole discussion from Greg. He gave me this, and then I built the rest of everything around that. And the specific denial of that generality, right? To deny that general existence. Right? You can't have this. Impossibility, you see that this is unique, right? This is different from this. None of the other two look like this, though all of these satisfy the condition for impossibility. I want to highlight that in red so that we see it, right? Impossibility. Okay. So I mean, it looks really daunting. It looks really intimidating. But the idea is, if you take it slow and you think about it, that's what I love about logic, is that it's not a memorization thing. If you really go slow with it and you understand the component parts, you can construct exceedingly complex things, but you do it very gradually. You just look at each part. And as you look at each part, you get to really, I mean, I would argue that there's some truth to this. Everything's always in a little t, right? But there is some truth to this, right? That when we talk about impossibility, we can refine our use of the term impossible by specifying what we mean by impossible. In our use of the term non-existence or absence, we can specify logically. Here's the proof, right? What we mean by absence or non-existence, and the specification, what I'm using for the sake of just I have to label this video something, the existential specificity is a means of at least encouraging the community to rigorously look at absence and non-existence as much as we look at stuff, existence, right? It's not all about positivism, verification, and empirical observation, because part of empirical observation is the lack of empirical observation, right? Which is the distinction, and that's the point. The lack of empirical observation results from two conditions, and this is specifically what I'm doing here. It results from there being nothing to observe, and there being an impossibility in observation. Think about that, right? So, I mean, part of empirical science is weighing, measuring, assessing, analyzing stuff, right? Either conceptually or mathematically. And the argument is, for us to just look at that, it would be awesome to, now I think I'm pushing it too far, but it'd be awesome to get a whole branch of stuff, sort of rigorous, logical semantics, or even, freaking physics, where it was like a whole thing into the systematic analysis of nothing. Or not even just a black hole, like non-existence, right? Conceptually speaking, you can talk about non-existence in terms of absence, or you can talk about non-existence in terms of impossibility to analyze. There's nothing here to analyze. It is impossible to analyze this. Both satisfy the condition of there being nothing there. But look how specific we're getting about talking about nothing, right? Oh, I love this existential specificity about nothing. Let's call it that. I like that. About, that's so gangster. That's so gangster. I don't care if anybody doesn't like this. I like this, right? Okay, so the last one, and then we'll be done. Yeah, I like that. Existential specificity about nothing, right? And then the last one is the impossible existence. We did this one. And then obviously the impossible existence, where we say that there is something that exists generally, right? So there exists an x such that that x is $1, and then making the claim that there is no specific dollar. You can't say that there exists an x such that that x is $1, right? That would be this. No, that would be one of these. And then to say that there is no specific dollars. You can't pinpoint a particular dollar. Well, if it's impossible, if you're saying that it is not possible to pinpoint a specific dollar, not this, not this, not this, it is impossible to make that assessment, then you've arrived at a contradiction, because you're saying there is an x such that that x is $1, and there is no specific x. There has to be at least one. There has to be at least one, right? And what this does is denies this, right? This denies this, so that you see it, right? This claim denies the existence of this, which puts you into a state of affairs like this, and this claim affirms this. These two things are not compatible. Obviously, you can't have a state of affairs like this with a state of affairs like this and say that you can't, right? So that you understand, and I hope the images help. They definitely help me. This state of affairs is visually represented by this, right? So you can't make the claim that you have a, there is an X such that X is $1. This is what Greg gave me as the prompt. And, right, and this is represented by something like this, which is different from this, but this is represented by this. And make the claim that there is no specific, right? It's an impossibility to have any, you can't pinpoint any of them, right? So to put that, there is a unique X, the denial of a unique X such that that X is $1, right? That becomes impossible. You can't have the general claim without the specific claim, right? So it's important to recognize, and I think, you know, this is off the top, right? I didn't really prep for this more than reading that little blurb on Frege and then getting the prompt from Greg, and I'm putting a lot on the line by throwing this out there, right? On my Facebook page, I talked about possible existence, but I decided just to remain coherent and consistent, let's just look at non-existence and the denial of stuff rigorously. Sort of, you know, the idea that came to me was the video that I did on solving the Rubik's Cube. I don't know that anyone's ever done a video like that, or that it's ever been tried, but that you can, I've demonstrated, I proved that you can solve the Rubik's Cube without any of the colors sort of matching, because you inverse the orientation of each specific square, right? But every square is in its appropriate place, thus the cube is conceptually solved, but it's solved in this warped sense. Similarly, there is a sense in which we can talk about sort of mathematically analyzing possible states of affairs with respect to Greg's pocket. But we recognize that the trick isn't in the existence between specifically $1 existence or $1 existing in sort of conceptually general sense. The trick really is in the absence of existence of $1. And we recognize that at least two conditions could exist that would account for this. Right? So that now we're more specific in talking about absence and talking about nothing, because we recognize that at least, and there's probably more, there's probably quite a bit more, you can probably take this on a whole nother level, but there's at least, so that was level one. Level two is, we recognize at least two conditions satisfy the absence of existence of money in his pocket. That's, I think, novel. Okay. To take it even deeper to a third level, we can then talk about, well, what would account for also that same absence? Not because there's any contradiction, there's no contradiction in this, right? This is the denial of this, and this is the denial of this, which would allow me to legitimately justify, logically, mathematically justify non-existence of $1 in general or specifically. But also, an impossible existence would also account for this absence. Thus, in talking about not having any money in his pocket, we could potentially mean 6 different things. This would satisfy that. 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 And this, there's 6 different ways of analyzing zero. Nothing. Not zero, but the absence of $1 in particular or specifically in his pocket. I think that's just cool. Right? To think about how complex we can take, sort of logically, the absence of something and just break it down and deconstruct it, and I think we could probably deconstruct it even deeper than this, right? We can talk in terms of regular negation, or we can talk in terms of impossible contradiction, both of which, all 6 of which, would satisfy this condition. So, yeah, pretty intense. And with that, I guess I'm formally back into uploading videos to YouTube. So I want to thank, but you know, they say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And this is me reemerging, hopefully stronger, into cyberspace, just to give you guys a little bit of taste of where I want to take all this crap. Right? I'm trying to do some good in the world. I really am. And I know a lot of people appreciate what I'm doing, but you know, there's so much more. There's so much more that I want to do, and there's so much more that I have to do. So Shout out again to Greg L, Lewis, Greg B, shout out to Cynthia, shout out to Lewis, shout out to Ozen. You guys, this video is dedicated to you because I really didn't want to come back into cyberspace, but if I'm going to come back, I'm going to come back hard. So I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want you to think about nothing.